Now, I'm thrilled to have my next guest on the Rita Panahi show every week for another year. He is one of the finest thinkers of his generation, the author of international bestsellers, including The Madness of Crowds, The Strange Death of Europe, and The War on the West. Douglas Murray, welcome back. We've got plenty to discuss. Let's start in the US. We're a week away from the second Trump term. What do you see as the greatest priority of the president-elect? He has quite a mess to clean up.
He does. I mean, I think the priorities are obviously going to be what he said on the campaign trail. The priorities have to be securing the southern border, securing the borders of the United States of America, preventing the illegal migration that's gone on so extraordinarily in recent years. Secondly, of course, there'll be the whole issue of the economy, of rebuilding the American economy. And I suppose the third thing, and as you say, it's a pretty big in tray that he's got, is going to be world affairs. There's a lot that's gone on in the world in the last 4 years that Trump said would not have gone on if he'd been in the White House. Now he's going to be back in the White House, and it's his chance to show the difference between Trump and Biden.
Now, in many ways, California serves as a warning to much of the US of what can happen when the Democrats enjoy one-party rule, when they can run amok. It is the bluest of blue states and has embraced just about every far-left policy, including DEI madness, even in the fire department. Let's have a listen here to the Los Angeles Fire Department Assistant Chief, Kristen Larson, talking about the importance of diversity, equity and inclusion.
You want to see somebody that responds to your house, your emergency, whether it's a medical call or a fire call, that looks like you. It gives that person a little bit more ease, knowing that somebody might understand their situation better. Is she strong enough to do this? Or you couldn't carry my husband out of a fire, which my response is, he got himself in the wrong place if I have to carry him out of a fire.
He got himself in the wrong place. That would be funny, Douglas, if it was a Babylon Bee sketch, but sadly it's all too real.
Absolutely, and that's including at the very top of the fire department in LA, at the head of the LA Fire Department. If you even now look at the website that she has, her bio, it's all about the fact that she's a diverse woman, that she's a proud member of the LGBTQIA+ community, and that her priority is diversity. The numbskull we just heard from there, also in the fire department, I mean, I hope very much that LA voters and others take note of this. In the end, these people who talked the diversity talk didn't know what they were doing in the real world. Actually, it's not about somebody who looks like you coming to your house. It's about somebody coming to your house. It's about somebody saving your house from burning down. I spoke to residents of LA earlier this week whose home and all their belongings had been burnt to nothing and has had their whole neighborhood. And they said to me, not one fire truck showed up, not one, Rita. Wow. Now, if I was a resident there and I'd heard this guff for years about how important it is that a diverse woman of color should come and how empowering it is that a lesbian is head of a... No, you just want competent fire authorities. And that is exactly what LA has not had. And we'll see if the appropriate lessons are learned from that or not. But this goes right up to the top. It's Governor Newsom who is doing this nonsense. It's the local mayor who is doing this nonsense, the heads of the fire service who are doing this nonsense. And in the end, somebody has to be responsible for the fact that there was no water. Somebody has to be responsible for the fact that there was no water coming out of the fire hydrants. Somebody has to be responsible for all this. And Governor Newsom has been standing intermittently, as we can see there, in front of these fires, in front of these burned out buildings, talking about how we can all pull together and go forward and all of the usual inane nonsense. And the whole neighborhood's burned down and is still burning. I hope very much the residents who suffered from this realize that this stuff is not a joke, and things were always too late for this nonsense, and they're certainly too late for it now.
Now, for many years under the Biden administration, we've seen white supremacy spoken of as the greatest threat facing America.
To single out as the most dangerous terrorist threat to our homeland is white supremacy.
And that divorce from reality worldview has, for many, many years, infected institutions like the Department of Justice, the FBI. How do you see that changing under Trump, particularly after the shock of the New Orleans terror attack on New Year's Day?
Well, you know, a counterterrorism and counter-extremism policy should be one of the most evidence-based policies in government. It should not be about pushing an ideology. It shouldn't be standing in front of a particular demographic and an electorate and saying, I've decided that X is the biggest threat. It should be based on what the biggest threats are. And, you know, this whole thing of, you know, that people like Biden for years have known that they'd get a sort of Democrat round of applause if they started talking about being against white supremacy. I mean, like, white supremacy is this thing where, like, everyone's agreed that they don't want it or like it. And nobody in the mainstream in politics or anything like that is pushing for the KKK to have a resurgence. When there is the occasional wacko white supremacist, everybody's joined in condemnation of them. But what's different, of course, is that when it's somebody who's an Islamist, as we had a number of attacks in America and Europe over Christmas carried out by people who appear to be driven by Islamic extremism, oh, well, those same people stop being evidence-based. In fact, they run away from evidence. They don't want to talk about that. Or we always get the thing of, this isn't the time to talk about it, and further down the line also isn't the time to talk about it. And actually, it turns out there's no time to talk about it. And I would just hope that there would be a realistic weighing up of the threats to the American homeland under the new administration, and weighing up those threats wherever they come from, and dealing with them wherever they come from. But we'll see. I mean, there's one of the things is that residues of administrations can last an awfully long time, particularly if they're of the left. They remain effectively in the trees and forests left behind by the retreating administration. And there will be whole structures in CIA, FBI, DHS, and others who will still be following the Democrat lead on this, even once the Republicans are back in. And that's one to really look out for, because it's one thing to have the policy. It's another thing to actually have departments and institutions of government that actually see it through.
And that, of course, happened during Trump's first term. So I think he's hopefully learned from that, and we're going to go scorched earth from day one. And if Kash Patel is there heading the FBI, I think you're going to see a little bit of that. But let's switch to the UK, where the Keir Starmer government seems to be more perturbed by the world's richest man, Elon Musk, shining a light on the grooming gang scandal than the fact that thousands of vulnerable girls were assaulted, were raped by mainly Pakistani Muslim men who were allowed for years to act with impunity due to political correctness. Douglas, we saw the rule of law, we saw common decency sacrificed in the name of community cohesion and cultural sensitivity. Has the UK now learnt its lesson? Could the grooming gang scandal happen again?
Oh, of course it could happen again, because the UK hasn't learned any lessons from it. And that's because, again, just like I was saying about institutions in America, in Britain, it's not just the two-tier policing system that Keir Starmer has overseen since coming into office. It's the fact that the police, local councillors, local councils, MPs, and others have all overseen this. And they've all overseen this. And it required, perhaps, Elon Musk and a few other high-profile accounts in America to pick up on this and say, oh, hang on, guys, what is it you've allowed to go on here? For people to actually realize again in Britain what this was, which was the biggest sexual crime carried out in modern British history, all not just under the noses of, but in front of the faces of all the relevant authorities. And, at the moment, the big grandstanding thing to do is to call for a full public inquiry into this. The truth is, there are plenty of public inquiries that have been taken place into these rape gangs, and nothing ever really changes that much because nobody asks answers which they don't want. Sorry, nobody asks questions rather that they don't want answers to, and the answers to this are, as I said in The Spectator this week, pretty straightforward, actually. They're that if a man is found to have been grooming, raping, gang raping, molesting women or underage girls, that person should go to a prison for a very long time. And if they have dual nationality, they should be chucked out of the UK. They should have their British nationality withdrawn, and they should be deported. Now, most of these men should be deported back to Pakistan, but the immigration system in Britain is so rotten that, as I mentioned again in The Spectator this week, a number of the men were released from prison early, used the time to appeal against their deportation, and used that time to give up their Pakistani citizenship so they could stay in the UK, because it takes so long to get people out of the UK. And in the end, nobody does get sent out of the UK. Oh, and then a couple of cases where people actually were able to be returned to Pakistan. Shock and horror, the Pakistani government didn't want more gang rapists in Pakistan, so they didn't receive them back. Well, any sensible government should say, you know what, Pakistan, we give you millions of pounds a year in foreign aid, as does our ally, the United States of America. You'll take your citizens back. You'll take them back. Otherwise, you can say bye-bye to any foreign aid or anything else. But, none of that is coming from the government, and too little of it, in my view, is coming from the opposition either. They're all fixated on this. Let's have years of inquiries. Inquiries don't matter a damn when what happens is, at the end of it, the inquiry is shelved, the person who's done the inquiry is thanked, and nothing changes.
It is just so shocking, and I'm glad at least the American attention is seeing the British public look at this again, because I was shocked. I wrote a lot about it at the time, 7-8 years ago. This is in my mind, the greatest scandal in modern British history, and people treated it like it was nothing. It was something that was worthy of a few headlines, and when we get on with life. And I don't think they've really examined how this happened, what it says about modern British culture, and the bureaucracy there. I mean,
absolutely, you're quite right. I mean, it's just astonishing. And as I say, it's partly because this is one of those stories that runs straight against the credo of our time in countries like Britain, and I'd argue Australia, most of Europe, and Canada, and other places as well. And the credo is diversity is our strength. Diversity is our strength. The more diverse we are, the better we are. And the societies that we're in were desperately boring, bland places until we brought some diversity into it. And, there's something to be said for the diversity argument, but not everything to be said for it. In fact, there are some things to be said against it. There are some times when you don't want to be more diverse. There are certain bits of diversity you don't really need. You don't really want, I would argue, hundreds of thousands of people potentially who have 7th century attitudes towards women being imported into your society and being told to just get on with it and being allowed to get on with it. And that's the problem for the authorities in all of this, is that, for all of the police awareness diversity days and all the council diversity is our strength days, the rape gangs case showed there are actually downsides to diversity. There are negatives to it as well. And they didn't want to admit to that. They couldn't admit to it because there'd be a follow-on question, which would be, what are you going to do about it? And so they just ducked it. They just ducked it. And they hoped, in the immortal words of that tweet that Labour MP Naz Shah briefly retweeted and then took down, that the raped girls of Rotherham should, quote, shut up for the sake of diversity. They should shut up for the sake of diversity. No, some of us, like you and me, Rita, always said that was wrong. These girls should have been listened to, and their complaints should have been acted upon. If anyone doubts that there is a double standard in modern Britain, as in many other Western liberal democracies these days, you just need to ask one question. What would have happened if it had been the other way round? What would have been the result if gangs of white working class men had been singling out underage Muslim Pakistani girls and gang raping them? Would we have passed it over? Would we have said that's a bit too awkward to talk about it? Would the police have just allowed it? Would the local councils have allowed it? Would the Pakistani community in Britain have allowed it? The answer to all of these things is, of course not. You just need to turn it the other way around, and you see the two-tier system in Britain at the moment, as in so many countries, because we cannot cope with the situation that generations of politicians have handed us.
Douglas Murray, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Great to see you, Rita.